Okay, this is great. So we have time for questions. What I'm going to ask you to do is to approach the microphone, but also come up if you're second, third in line so that we can get to as many questions. We just had presentations where we talked about plagiarism, copy edits, copyright, personal health information, peer review, and more. I'd like to hear questions for Peter, Chloe, and Ben.
This is kind of a technical question for Ben, but I didn't know it was possible to change those status descriptors in Scholar One. Is that something you can do, or do you have to go to Scholar One to have that done? Because I struggle with that too.
Yeah. So it is one of those kind of configuration things. It does have to go through Scholar One, but it's pretty easy. I can catch up with you after and show you how.
Great.
But it's amazing.
Okay.
I have a question. Also for Ben. Can you talk a little bit more in depth of your survey that you did of your reviewers, what they're looking for and what you did with the information, what kind of information you found, and how you would handle it if it was really awful information for the editor?
One would hope that if you're asking reviewers that kind of detail, you're ready for whatever. In this case, it was pretty positive. It was just an informal blast email to reviewers. The editor emailed everybody who'd reviewed in the last 3 years, none of which was under her tenure, but just to get a sense of how reviewers reacted. The questions were things like the level of reminders. Are we sending you too many? Are we sending you too few? Do you feel like you're keeping up with us, we're keeping up with you? She asked about the reviewer score sheet. What questions are there? Do you feel like they're sufficient? Do you feel like we're asking you, again, too many questions? Is it a 1 to 5 scale? Do you like writing things out? Just that kind of stuff, that kind of very general overview stuff. And then, of course, reviewers had the opportunity to say, like, I get 37 reminders, or I get 37 invitations a year, this is too many, things like that. So, of course, the feedback that she got was a mixed bag, right? I think, a lot of reviewers thankfully said, I appreciate the opportunity to contribute to the community. Now here's my list of gripes. But I think that she was prepared for all outcomes. I mean, she wasn't going to not use somebody as a reviewer if they had had a negative experience. If you did that, then chances are nobody would review for any journal ever. But it was a really interesting opportunity, I think, just on a journal level to see, how folks are engaging. You can tell what their thoughts are on the paper, but what are their thoughts in the journal? We don't necessarily ask those questions super often. So I thought it was really interesting feedback.
What do we make of the fact that so much in publishing is on a volunteer basis? I know this came up in Bill's presentation as well, that this is a business and people are doing things for volunteer, little or no compensation. Any thoughts from any of the panelists or the room about how to communicate that this is a business, but it's for a common good and there are reasons for it? And how else do we incentivize beyond payments?
Yeah, so it's a challenge for sure. I mean, especially reviewers, you don't know how many invitations reviewers get. I'm not a scientist, but if a journal invites a reviewer 10 times a year, and there's 10 journals in the field, they're getting, dozens of invitations a year to review out of the goodness of their hearts. So that incentivization is a real challenge. I know, this is not a sales pitch for Wiley, but I mean, we've partnered with Publines to kind of better reflect the work that reviewers are doing. We are starting to offer more reviewer certificates ad hoc, discounts on, books and conferences and things like that, just to let reviewers know that we appreciate your contribution. It's hugely important to science, and here's a little something that's not money, but just it's more than just thanks at the end of the year. Here's a line in the journal. So.
Medical journals, you can also offer CME for peer review.
Other suggestions? So CME has been used, other ways to incentivize those working in your programs?
I had an editor who wanted me, I think around Christmas time or New Year's, to send out a really personalized thank you letter to reviewers, which I know that's not, a great incentive, but actually I think it is, because it's heartfelt and personal. And, the editor is specifically reaching out to the reviewers that they use. So I think, that goes in line with why reviewers do what they do, so.
Yeah, and I think just as a last point there, I mean, I think anything is really useful, right? Like I was at a conference last year where the journal had like a rewards point system, and it wasn't rewards for like Tahitian vacations. You could turn in your points for luggage tags, but reviewers loved it. So it doesn't have to be, hugely intellectually stimulating, just something to say, thank you. That's really the big thing here.
Yeah, and I'll just add that having moved from consumer publishing to scholarly publishing, where while there's obviously other motivations in the consumer publishing world, the authors were always very concerned about how much they were being compensated and whether they were getting what they were supposed to be getting. It was a shock to me moving into scholarly publishing how much people volunteer their services, and continues to amaze me. So I think the ideas that have been said before are great, but I think when we're encountering sort of the issues that we've been talking about today, I try to do my best to sort of keep in mind that, even though certain people may be difficult or not be doing things the way that I want to do, they're largely doing this for the betterment of their field, and so to kind of keep that appreciation in mind.
Okay, I'd still like to hear a couple of case studies from the audience. If anyone does have a great case study that will help your peers learn, so come on up to the microphone if you have some. In the meantime, I've got a question for all of you as well, including some of the speakers earlier today. We talked a lot about editorial board transitions, and sometimes it was mentioned, I think Lindsay might have mentioned a 3 or 5 or 10-year transition, whereas Bill mentioned having a board in place for 35 years for something. How many of you have clear-cut transitions and timelines for your EABs? Do you have clear-cut, or is it? So who has clear-cut guidelines, if you can raise your hands? Some. And whose are more loosey-goosey? Okay. And what do you like better, if it's clear or loosey-goosey? It's loosey. Clear is easier, although if it's loosey-goosey, then you don't have to deal with it during your tenure there, right?
It is getting more difficult to find individuals who are willing to be editors, especially in our space. Not only is it more difficult to find reviewers of journals for our faculty board, that's really getting more difficult, but getting qualified individuals who are willing to edit humanities journals is getting more difficult, because in many places they don't get academic credit, professional credit for editing a journal. The currency in humanities is the monographs. So they really are doing it out of service. So that's getting really difficult.
Okay, audience?
I did actually have a case study, actually, and this is something that I'm sure that everybody can relate to. Misunderstanding of what fair use means, especially as, I think, sorry, was it Peter?
Yeah.
I think you were talking about people kind of ganking things off the internet, not realizing that just because it's on the internet, it's not free use. And this actually, and it's a funny story, I repeat this often, I think in a 2-week period, I had 4 or 5 different authors submitting to different journals, and I was over 3 journals at one point at my last association, submitting pictures of Tom Cruise from various movies. and it was visual studies, and it was very similar types of visual studies, like where your eye is drawn on, in this picture. And I had to write back and essentially say, and I knew some of these submitters, I said, could you have picked a less litigious celebrity, perhaps? But no, it was fascinating to me, because I would say about 75% of the people who were submitting, they were outside of the United States, and they had kind of like second or third person understanding of what our fair use laws were. They pretty much thought it was, if I can lay hands on it and it's out there, then I can use this. Like, basically it hasn't been nailed down. So I'm wondering if anybody else has anything that's come up like that.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking about it a little bit, but yeah, I mean, I tend to find that it is weird how situations will tend to kind of group and come up, but I think for me the most common misunderstanding when it comes to fair use is if I change it at all, it's therefore then okay to use. So a lot of times you'll come across, and then when you do a compare, what you realize is that they changed 1 or 2 words a sentence and thought that sort of covered it. I think the trickiest thing in that is identifying it, because a lot of times, people, the process isn't set up to actually run everything through a plagiarism check or anything like that. So if you don't, for me, where I tend to identify them is where, and it's kind of more just sort of either innate or learned editorial experience, but the cadence will change in their writing all of a sudden. Whether it's that they're more of an informal writer and all of a sudden they've got this fairly formal patch, or vice versa. And I just sort of learned to trust the red flags on that. You're trying to get through a chapter or an article or whatever, and you just kind of keep pushing on. But when you get that sort of spider sense in your head, it's best to kind of check it out. And it's simple. It's as simple as throwing a paragraph into Google and seeing what comes up, and then usually we'll let you know if there's an issue that needs to be investigated more.
Okay, I'd like to thank everyone for your participation in today's seminar. I really want to thank the 6 speakers today who took the time to make these presentations as volunteers.
We got cookies.
We did get cookies.
Cookies, another incentive, and they were very engaging presentations. I know I was really looking forward to hearing them all for the first time here. I'd like to also thank the subcommittee members who put together the pre-conference seminars, and also my co-organizer, Patty Davis. Also like to thank the SSP staff for putting together this opportunity. You're going to receive an additional evaluation via email. Please stick around for the keynote session that's at 4 o'clock today. That's followed by the SSP speed networking at 5 o'clock and the opening reception from 6:30 to 8 o'clock. Hope to see you there. And again, these are the speakers today, but I really want to thank you in the audience for your participation. And I also want to thank you for your key role in managing difficult editorial situations. It doesn't always trigger an ovation in your office when you're working on these things, so let's recognize each other here.
That's why it's actually kind of the opposite. Usually the tougher ones come up with the ones you're trying to keep quiet.